Are you ready to hear a story that will give you goosebumps? If you are, hit that like button to boost your courage, share to warn your friends, and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss any chilling tales from us. Now then, let the story begin. 3 hours ago, two unidentified objects blipped onto our radar at an undisclosed location over the Pacific Ocean. They didn't come together, but one at a time, appearing from the same exact spot and starting to circle around aimlessly, like they were lost or disoriented. At first, we thought it might have been a glitch, a simple error with the technology, until we started receiving the calls for help. They started out slow, eerie, cryptic. A voice softly sounded through the static of our radio, rising in pitch, panicked, before boiling back down to a dull groan. This repeated over and over until we began picking out words, some that made sense, most that didn't. I was the first to hear a word: planet. The others initially thought it might have just been plane, but I could distinctly hear the T at the end, and after a while the others heard it too. As part of the Coast Guard, it's of course our duty to respond or investigate such events, but this call had us scared, and some wondered if it was just an elaborate prank. We crouched around the bridge and listened to the radio for a long time, watching the blips move round and round the radar, pinging out their location, until the commander threw up his arms in frustration. But when he strode over and slammed the radio off, yelling at the first officer to dial up the powers that be, I could tell that it wasn't frustration that he was feeling, it was fear. An hour ago, mysterious representatives from both the US and British governments arrived in a large helicopter that roared onto our deck with skilled precision. 3 men in suits stepped out, accompanied by what looked like military personnel. They were swiftly ushered into the bridge room to be briefed. I lagged behind them, slightly overwhelmed by what was happening, and walked into a room filled with an excited buzzing. The 3 men in suits were standing together, looking at a handful of printouts. After a few minutes, a man with wood-colored hair looked up and introduced himself to the room at large, before saying, "Back in 1948 and 1949, respectively, 2 British South American Airways flights disappeared over the Bermuda Triangle. I know how it sounds." He held up his hands to the collective groan that rose up and continued. The thing is, though, both these disappearances were ruled unsolved. The BSAA Star Tiger disappeared on January 30th, 1948, and the BSAA Star Ariel disappeared almost exactly a year later, on January 17th, 1949. In total, 51 people were lost on those flights, never to be seen again. To this day, both disappearances remained unsolved. However, we have received a certain amount of data that has given us reason to believe that those 2 objects are the Star Ariel and the Star Tiger. The room was silent for a beat, and then the buzzing rose up again, louder than before. Around me, I could see the excited, frightened faces of my fellows. The man raised a hand, and the room quieted a bit. Like I said, I know how this sounds. I know Bermuda is thousands of miles from here, in a different ocean. And I know there are and will be many questions, some relating to the possible and some relating to the impossible. All I can tell you now is that the planes are there, they are real, and we will be... A tinny noise rang out, and the man abruptly stopped talking, pulling out his phone and glancing at the 2 other men. They excused themselves and exited the room. A little over 30 minutes ago, a boat from NOAA finally reached the rendezvous point and sidled up close enough to let some members board. They looked exhausted. We were told that they had a vested interest in helping us obtain any information possible about the Ariel and the Tiger. They crowded into the bridge, bringing with them their own instruments and data, setting up around and in between our own work. I found myself next to a marine geologist who was helping to transcribe a set of points that mapped the slightly changing route of each object. She introduced herself and we began to talk, speculating about what might be going on. Around us, the busy sounds of machines and people working blended together into an uneasy dissonance. The door opened and the man with the wood-color hair walked in and looked around for a moment before edging his way around the crowd of people standing by the desk towards us. "Oh, Dr. Pike, this is... Cooper," Dr. Pike said stiffly. "Miriam," he said, grinning. He extended a hand and she shook it tersely, her lips pressed tight together, her eyes bright. It was like she was trying not to smile. I looked between them, confused. "Wait," I began. "You 2 know each other?" They glanced at each other. Dr. Pike broke the gaze first, shuffling the papers in front of her before looking back at me. "We've met," she said simply. Cooper cleared his throat, then said loudly, so the entire room could hear, "I just got word back about the satellite imagery. They said the planes, both of them, seemed to be entirely full of people, at least double the amount that was lost. This is, of course, impossible. But 2 planes that have been missing since the 40s have just reappeared over 3,000 miles from where they disappeared from, totally unscathed, and with enough fuel to fly in never-ending circles. So I guess nothing is really impossible." He took a breath. "That said, we've been given direct orders for immediate reconnaissance." A voice rang out, high, afraid. "What do you mean by that?" "I mean, we're going to bring them down, gently, board them, and find out what the hell is going on." I looked at him confused. "We?" Dr. Pike shook her head in a final sort of way. "Nope, not this time. I'm staying right here." Cooper maintained eye contact with me, but smirked at her words. "What about you, bud? You in?" I looked at him, thinking, before I nodded resolutely. He smiled widely and said, "Better suit up then." "So?" I said, climbing awkwardly up into the response boat medium, RBM, behind Cooper. "How could you even tell that there were people in the planes, or that they doubled for that matter?" He didn't look back, making his way to the bow. We were both wearing strange-looking wetsuits that seemed to protect against more than just water. "You ever heard of X-37B?" he asked over his shoulder. "No," I said, watching 3 other men lift a heavy-looking crate up the side, placing it on the starboard side. "Well, then let's just say I'm privy to some interesting projects, and was able to secure the use of one of these to obtain more information about the planes. Information like infrared scans over a certain period showing that there were indeed figures inside, a lot of them, and that they were all moving." A roaring noise drowned out his voice, leaving me unable to respond. I looked up, watching as the enormous helicopter Cooper called the Osprey circled overhead before veering off in the direction the planes were located. "Are we certain that they'll be able to bring the planes down gently? And I mean, how the hell are they even going to get onto the planes in the first place?" He was looking up at the aircraft almost wistfully and said, "Oh, I wouldn't doubt them just yet. They're the best in the world." "Yes, so I've been told, but it just seems impossible." Cooper looked at me, his face inscrutable. "You sure you want to be saying something like that right now?" The Osprey was scheduled to get there about 30 minutes ahead of us. The men on board were apparently going to rappel down onto the planes, somehow board them, and begin the process of ditching them into the ocean while, at the same time, attempting to keep them relatively intact. It sounded cool, yeah, but also totally unfeasible to me, so 30 minutes later, when we received word that the men had made it on board and were proceeding to ditch the planes, I could barely meet Cooper's eye as he sat, smirking, beside me. At first, the responses of the men ditching the planes were coherent, and we watched as each plane slowly made their descent towards the ocean. But as time went on, the responses became less and less logical, and what started as a straightforward narration of their actions inside ended up in just a few spoken words, unintelligible and strange, like a different language. We listened to the voices with grim faces. Their replies were dim and dying, spiraling out from the small speaker propped at front of the bridge in weird bursts. It sounded like they were trying to reason with someone or something. In the air, we could see both the planes still circling around us towards the fathomless depths below, and watched with bated breath as the first plane touched the water, and then the second. One of them landed smoother than the other, sliding slowly to a stop, while the other one bounced once, twice, before finally settling, sending ripples towards us that bobbed us up and down. Suddenly, without warning, an uncanny jittering sounded out over the radio. Perhaps it was screaming or crying, or both. And then, bursting up even louder than before, a deep voice speaking that strange, semi-intelligible language. Cooper was listening with his head cocked, his eyes slightly squinted. He stood straight and exclaimed, "It's backwards. They're speaking backwards. Someone is recording this, right?" A hasty acknowledgement came from somewhere behind us. "Good," he said. "Makes so..." But what he was about to say was drowned out in what sounded like rapid gunfire, more yelling, and then, suddenly, silence. And that silence consumed the bridge of the RBM, seemingly sucking up all sounds into it, leaving us looking at each other with wide, frightened eyes. After a few moments, there was a beeping noise, and one of the men quickly answered his satellite phone. He listened briefly before announcing that we would proceeding with our investigation. We would be using 2 over-the-horizon cutter boats to reach the planes, and that we would be going out in 2 teams of 4. Now that the men on the planes were unresponsive, he said, we would have to investigate. There was no way they would risk sending out more men, and since we were already positioned, this would be the first and only chance before they blew both planes to high hell. We broke soon after, and the action made me feel better, like there was something, maybe, that I could do to help. I followed Cooper and the other men to the port side where we boarded and lowered the cutters into the water. The larger vessels were told to stay far back in case of a containment breach, and were given specific instructions not to come to our aid if things didn't go according to plan. The roar of the Osprey died away as it returned to its carrier. The first thing we did when we reached the planes was inflate 2 large flotation devices under their wings, and though we knew they wouldn't hold them up indefinitely, they helped ease our fears that we would get trapped inside and sink to the bottom of the ocean floor with them. But even with the help, the planes still floated listlessly in the water, like dead things. Our team was responsible for reconnoitering the Tiger, and as they pulled open the hatch, I felt the dread rise inside of me thick, strong, and regretted my decision to investigate. Cooper turned around and pointed to his mask, telling me silently to put mine on. I shoved it on just as the men began to board, then climbed in after them, seeing their backs disappear into the darkness inside. I was scared and felt my pulse ascend into my throat, making it hard to swallow and harder to breathe. Inside, there was darkness and silence. We stood near the opening, trying to communicate with the other team, let them know we were in, but there was no response. Suddenly, a voice sounded out and I jumped visibly, before realizing that it was coming from the little nodule attached to the front of Cooper's gear that allowed those back on the larger vessels to see and hear what was happening. He patted me on the back before responding, "Tiger receiving. Tiger, check your camera. We're seeing only darkness on this side. We've lost all contact with Ariel." Cooper messed with it for a moment, then asked if it was better. "Negative. But we're getting some imagery in, and most of the entities inside are crowded near the back of the plane, where the boarding team entered. And 3 are standing near the cockpit. It looks like they're waiting to greet you." Cooper peered into the darkness, then looked back at me, puzzled. Acknowledged. "We're going in." The men in front of us began moving forward, flicking on their lights as they did so. The lights did really nothing to illuminate the plane, only made it look darker, and increased my feeling of foreboding as they flashed around the walls and seats. Water was already starting to seep into the bottom of the plane and sloshed around us as we stepped through it, soaking our boots. The plane was empty, totally empty. I was, at the very least, expecting to see the bodies of the soldiers who landed the plane, but even they were gone. There was nothing inside, only darkness, a rank smell, and a tense atmosphere. "What's that?" I whispered, and Cooper turned, looking at where I was pointing. On one of the seats was a small pile of smooth black stones, stacked in the shape of a pyramid. Cooper grabbed one of them up, turning it around in his hands, trying to figure out what it was. Finally, he said, "Your guess is as good as mine," and pocketed it. The 2 other men were already at the back of the plane, shining their lights in all the nooks and crannies. One of them turned back to us and yelled, "Clear!" Cooper opened his mouth, presumably to respond back, but was cut off by another voice. "Tiger, you seeing that?" "What?" "That. Everyone. They're crowding around the 2 in the back. We can see them, moving. They're there, clear as day." "What?" "There's nothing here, nothing. The plane is totally empty." A sharp banging rose up and we froze, perking up, trying to identify the sound. Gunshots, echoing over the water from the Ariel. And then, a high-pitched screaming. It sounded like someone was being ripped apart. "What the fuck?" It was one of the men near the rear of the plane. He was looking down at his feet. At first, it simply looked like some of the seawater was splashing up around him, like the plane was just sinking deeper into the ocean. But then, in the faint light, I saw it wasn't water at all. Hands. A multitude of hands, reaching up, clasping onto his pants, his shoes, his legs, and pulling down, hard. He yelled again, this time in pain, and we watched as his shins splintered, exploding brilliant red in our light, splattering the mask of the shocked man beside him. Chaos erupted around the other man, the water boiling up, frenzied, latching onto him, sucking him down sideways. I stood, frozen, as his face melted into the waters, meeting the gaze of his one remaining eye, seeing the absolute terror in it. "Move!" Cooper pushed me powerfully towards the hatch, but even with him urging me on, I couldn't stop looking, and saw what looked like appendages, faces pressing up in the water, flooding the plane. It was fucking horrifying, and in my fear, I stopped at the hatch, petrified, seeing the water conglomerate into massive body parts. It was making a spine-shattering screeching noise. And then I felt my feet leave the floor of the plane. Cooper had shoved me into the ocean. One moment I was standing staring, the next I was floating, seemingly weightless, and I couldn't breathe. The depth of the ocean surrounded me, pressing up beneath me, and in that emptiness, that expanse, I panicked, sucking in seawater with each gasp. A hand reached forward and shoved a mouthpiece at my face, then began dragging me towards the bobbing cutter. My brain kicked in and I began to swim towards it, pulling myself up into it. I helped Cooper into the cutter and he swiftly commandeered it, spinning it back into the direction of the RBM. Horrified, I watched the open hatch of the Tiger. Through it I could see arms, an uncountable number of arms, all blackened like they were burned, reaching out for us, clawing at the air. And inside, faintly, I heard someone screaming to make it stop, make it stop. A few of the hands, longer than the others and disjointed, reached for us, grasping at the sides of our cutter, making sick squeaking noises and leaving streaks of night-colored goo across the surface. I suppressed the urge to vomit and scooted further back from their reach. "Here." I turned around. Cooper was holding a pistol out to me. I reached for it with shaking hands and took it. "Shoot." "Will it even do anything?" I gasped, trying to dry my hands so the gun wouldn't slip. "I have no idea. Try!" I fired off 4 rounds, hitting the blackened thing emerging from the plane twice with bullets that burst so bright it was almost unbearable to look at them. The thing screamed, its voice pitched high and low before retreating. We sped up to the side of the RBM and Cooper swiftly tied off to its side, then began clambering up the ladder. Above us, I could see the one man we left behind peering over the railing at us. He was holding a gun. "Hey," the man said, trying to block Cooper from boarding. "You can't come up here. You're compromised." Cooper sighed and glanced back at me. "I've been given express or—" Suddenly, Cooper Sucker punched the man right in the face, and he staggered back, looking at him with confusion and anger. Cooper punched him again, and the man fell backwards against the railing, limp. "Sorry," Cooper said, pulling off his mask and throwing it off to the side, before running over to the starboard side. I glanced at the fallen man for a moment before taking off my own mask and following him. He was kneeling by the heavy-looking crate, now open, and was quickly assembling a long, thick cylinder. It was only after he lifted it up onto his shoulder and fired that I realized it was a motherfucking rocket launcher. After the thwoop of the rocket leaving the chamber, there was a brief silence, and I watched confused, waiting for the impact. Beside me, Cooper was already loading another rocket into the chamber. He finished around at the same time the first plane exploded in a brilliant display and aimed again, briefly. There was another thwoop, and after a pregnant pause, the second plane soon followed suit. Cooper set down the launcher and stood up. "Fire," he said beside me, staring out at the 2 burning planes. Their flames shot high into the darkening sky, blending with the sunset. "Fire is awesome." I looked at him, then back at the planes, not knowing what to say. Not long after, men wearing clean suits boarded the RBM and led us to a makeshift decontamination chamber. And so that's where I've been. Decontamination. For nearly half a goddamn day. At least I was with Cooper, which, honestly, made it more bearable. His quips, his sarcasm cheered me, made me feel better, like I wasn't going to be shot or taken by some shadowy government institution and locked away forever for what I saw. Oh, the man Cooper punched was also there, which made things more interesting. We were released about an hour ago, my stomach grumbling loudly. Cooper looked at me, amused, and told me to go eat something, that he would be around if I wanted to talk later. I thanked him and made my way to the mess hall. When I was sated, I went to find him and saw him on deck holding a bag of frozen peas across his right hand and talking with Dr. Pike. They were standing awfully close together. I approached them hesitantly, not wanting to interrupt. Cooper looked up, smiled, and waved me over with his good hand. Dr. Pike glanced at me, took a few steps away from him, and leaned over the railing. The wind ruffled her burgundy-colored hair. "How are you feeling?" Cooper said, leaning against the railing next to Pike, except backwards, so he was facing me. I said, "Fucked." Cooper laughed. "Sounds about right." Did you get something to eat? Yeah, it was... I said again. Our eyes met for a moment, and I blurted out, "So, you're not, in trouble for punching that dude in the face? Or for blowing up the planes?" Cooper smiled winningly. "Nope." Okay, who are you again?" "Cooper," he said slowly, clearly confused. Beside him, Pike looked down, smiling. No, I mean, who do you work for? What is it that you do?" "Oh," he said, catching on. "Oh, I can't tell you that." "Why?" He shrugged, and after a brief silence said, "Not yet." "Not..." Dr. Pike turned around and spoke in a low voice, cutting me off. She was no longer smiling. "That weird backward speech we heard earlier? Well, we know what it was saying now." "And?" I said, watching as Cooper and Pike glanced at each other. "It was saying it's inside the planet." "Inside the... what?" I was confused, frightened, exhausted. "That's not all," Dr. Pike said. "We've recorded something. A sound, loud, insistent, coming from deep inside the Mariana Trench. We've been asked to investigate." "So, what do you say, bud?" Cooper smiled at me and threw a hand across my shoulder. "You in for another round?" "Hey again. It's me, Tommy. I don't think I told you my name before. I'm the Chief Warrant Officer, for the Coast Guard, who was there when those two planes were, neutralized. Dr. Pike asked me to take over recording this leg of the expedition for her. She's been absolutely swamped with work. I don't think she even sleeps anymore." Which, I guess, also answers the question if I took Cooper up on his offer. I did. We're about a day out from the trench, surrounded by open ocean and obscurity and terror. And I'm scared. I'll skip that Lord of the Rings-style exposition about journeying and get right to the meat of it. I will say, though, that it took a while for us to get all the way out here, and I'm looking forward to getting off this damn boat. Cooper's here, of course, as well as a lot of other more serious-looking men in black suits. They seem to not like him very much, but he doesn't seem to care. Seems amused by it, actually. I could be wrong, though. We cast off over a week ago, but have only learned a little more about that thing in the time that's passed since the planes and rocket launcher. Several tests have been done on the sample Cooper obtained for Leo, but there's a slight problem. The substance seems to defy and meet every expectation of it, like it knows it's being observed. It shifts from something recognizable to something utterly alien. And the scientists on board disagree about the thing inside those planes being the same as the thing making those noises we're headed towards. And those noises, they're haunting, echoing through the waters towards us, making those who listen look around with frightened, grim eyes. They sound intelligent, like they're speaking, trying to tell us something. Several people, including Dr. Pike and Cooper, have been trying to decipher at least some of the sounds, but to no avail. Speaking of Dr. Pike and Cooper, I never see one without the other anymore, and it's pretty obvious to everyone that they enjoy each other's company. And honestly, between the two of them, I have a feeling we'll figure this all out. Hopefully, sooner rather than later, so we can all go home and sleep easy at night. And hopefully, nothing bad will happen along the way. Hopefully, it won't come to Plan C. 3 days ago, I woke late and scrambled up, not wanting to miss the briefing. But when I got to the bridge, it was clear that I had, so I slipped in, unnoticed. Around me, the hustle of focused work flowed without stop, and I tried to insert myself into it without getting in the way. I glanced around, looking for someone I knew, and saw Dr. Pike working fervently by one of the windows. Her hair was thrown up into a messy knot, and she had dark bags under her eyes. She was working alone, which was rare. Usually she and Cooper would set up somewhere in the bridge together, working late into the night side by side. I meandered my way towards her, not wanting to interrupt, but also wanting to ask her the singular question that had been on my mind ever since I first saw them together. "So," I said, sidling up next to her, "you and Cooper?" She looked at me, surprise vibrant on her face. "What about me and Cooper? Are you two, What? No! Him!" Together we looked across the bridge. He was standing in a small circle of men listening to one of them speaking. He saw us looking and waved, grinning openly. Pike looked back at me, her cheeks red, and I raised my eyebrows, trying not to smile. "No," she repeated stiffly. "Never." Okay, I said, holding up my hands in a gesture of acquiescence. "So, tell me about the sample." She sighed, clearly annoyed, but pulled open the small cooler on the desk and took out a petri dish containing a fragment of the black substance. It looked strange, and as I peered closer at it, I noticed movement. like it was alive. It twisted around slowly, like it was testing the glass, seeing if there was a way out. I watched, mesmerized, not even looking up when Pike started speaking. It's odd, to put it simply, shifting between something like a prion to something I've never seen before. I'm no expert, but it seems alien. I made a small noise, skeptical of what she was saying. I know how it sounds, she continued, but there's really no other way to describe it. Describe what? It was Cooper. I looked up from the petri dish to see him standing next to Pike. They weren't looking at each other, but I could see Pike's face flush up. This, I said for her, pointing down at the dish. It's black and gooey and gross, Cooper said, grinning. Pike rolled her eyes, but she was smiling, so I knew she wasn't mad. How very observant of you, she said, finally meeting Cooper's gaze. If only we had known that 3 days ago. He smirked, and she continued. In all seriousness, though, I sincerely have no idea what this is. To me, it seems like even if this thing and whatever it was on those planes aren't the exact same, they're at least related. The main difference being, the substance on the planes was more volatile than this. The three of us looked down at the dish. It doesn't seem like this stuff wants to harm us. It seems, to me, like it's studying us, learning. Interesting observations, Cooper said, bending down over the table. The substance in the dish moved slightly towards him and up, like it was looking back at him. I chanced to glance over to where he had come from and saw that the men were still standing in a circle talking. One or two were glaring over in our direction. I said, hesitating. Are you supposed to be over there, Cooper? He shrugged, sitting down and pulling some of Pike's notes towards him. No point. They're not going to listen to me no matter what I say. Miriam, what's this you've written here? He pointed down at one of the pages, and she leaned over, looking down at it over his shoulder. I left soon after, not wanting to disturb their concentration. The day before yesterday, we all gathered around in the bridge, watching on small screens the descent of one of the unmanned submersibles into the trench. I heard someone say that this was Cooper's idea, the only one they had actually listened to. That he, at the very least, wanted to make sure it was safe before we sent anyone else down there. The picture on the screen was dim, low res, but it still gave us an idea of what was waiting below. When we finally saw it, an audible gasp rose up around the room. A mass, blackened, thick, was bubbling up from the trench. It was indescribably large. Along the ridge of it, pushing out from the trench, were an uncountable number of appendages, long and thin, nearly touching the surface, feeling the water. And yet, they ignored the sub as it made its way down through them. Another gasp rang out as we saw what looked like an enormous eye appear on the screen. Its pupil was dilated, bright blue, and moved slightly as it watched the sub approach. But it did nothing. Nothing at all. Only observed. Maybe it's not a threat, someone said from behind us. Maybe we should get the fuck out of here, another voice replied, and a few people cheered. Maybe we shouldn't forget about Plan C. It was one of the men in suits. He was looking directly at Cooper, who returned his gaze, unyielding. In the end, the general consensus was that it would be safe enough to send people down, and that we needed to know more about it before we made our next move. Beside me, I heard Cooper mutter a long string of insults under his breath before turning on his heel and leaving. Dr. Pike glanced at me before following him out. I looked back over at the man who had spoken. He was smiling smugly. The night before yesterday, I was in the bridge when one of the scientists handed me a stack of papers and asked me to go find Dr. Pike, or Cooper. And I set off, knowing that if I found one, I'd find the other. At first, I thought maybe they had gone to bed, but just as I was about to give up, I saw them, standing against the railing, looking up. Cooper was leaning close to her, pointing up at something in the sky, guiding the line of her gaze with his arm. And the way she looked up at him, well, I didn't really want to disturb them. Pike saw me first, then Cooper turned and beckoned me over. Both acted coolly as I approached, but Pike seemed embarrassed and wouldn't meet my gaze. I said, I can come back later. Cooper smiled. No, please join us. I was just showing the Pleiades to Miriam here. Oh, the 7 sisters, right? Yes, except there aren't 7, Pike said, still looking up in the direction of the constellation. What? She's right, Cooper said. Look for yourself. I did. She was. I opened my mouth to say something, but Cooper continued. Have either of you ever heard of Tabby's star? Pike spoke up immediately. That's the one star they discovered, the odd one. Its light is fluctuating irregularly, something they've never seen before. I think they said it was a, something sphere. Dyson sphere, Cooper said. But yes, that's the one. It's gone. Just like that one. He pointed up again at the constellation. Okay, harder question. Ever heard of the Montauk Project? It was my turn to speak up, but before I did, I laughed. You mean that government conspiracy? The one about all those illegal experiments? The Montauk Monster? I was smiling openly now. Well, what about it? Please don't say what I think you're going to say. Cooper smiled apologetically. Sorry, bud, but it's real. Oh, come on, Cooper. He simply nodded his head. I know. But all those experiments, the secrets, the lore, I've heard first-hand accounts of... I'm sorry, but what's happening? Pike asked, cutting in, looking between us with a confused expression on her face. The Montauk Project, Cooper started, but I glanced over, knowing what he was going to say, so I cut him off again, my voice seeping with sarcasm. They allegedly opened a hole in the sky, or were trying to. Maybe they unleashed something they shouldn't have. Right, Cooper? Is that why stars are now missing? He simply glanced at me, then leaned back over the railing, looking up at the sky. Beside him, Pike gave me a puzzled expression. I didn't return it, and looked up too. Maybe, he said finally. Yesterday we arrived. Looking over the side of the ship, you could almost make out that blackness rising from the depths below. The water was glass smooth and inviting. It seemed so safe out. I wanted to go with them. I don't regret it. I never will. I only regret what happened. Before the disaster, right before, Pike hissed to us that she thought she had found something. A message in the sounds we were hearing coming from the trench. We headed out on one of the smaller vessels, halting exactly over the trench proper. The air above it felt electrified, thick, and we didn't speak as we suited up. It was only a precaution, in case the subs failed in some way. But we didn't even get a chance to launch the subs and were just getting ready to climb into them when it hit the starboard side, knocking the vessel over like a toy in a bath. It was only after I had hit the water and started to sink that I realized what had happened. I flailed out, grabbing my oxygen tank and shoving the mouthpiece in, blowing up and into my goggles, clearing them. Around me, I could see an uncountable number of bodies, some limp, some still moving. I started to swim up when I saw it, rising up from below, a nightmare. It was like a roiling mass of worms, cigar-shaped and fully black. So black, it seemed to tint the color of the water around it, turning it into an impenetrable veil that hid its dreadfulness. But I did see something that will haunt me until the day I die. It was Pike. She was sinking fast, too fast, and somehow her mask and her tank had become dislodged. I saw her reach up, out, and I saw Cooper swimming after her. And I saw that it was too late. The black tendrils were already wrapping themselves tightly around her torso, pulling her back down towards the gaping hole that descended into darkness. The one giant eye was bright red now, pulsating, full open and horrible. And I saw her face, barely lit by the weak light of sun. She was looking straight at Cooper. Her eyes were huge. I could see the hope slowly die in them as she was pulled down, down. The last thing I saw, the last thing I remember, was the way the bubbles gleamed as they rose out from her mouth, opened in an unheard scream, and her hand, reaching up, going limp before floating listlessly above her like a sick streamer. I must have blacked out. Cooper must have pulled me up because one moment I was watching her disappear, and the next several hands were latching onto me, pulling me up and onto a lifeboat. Disoriented, I glanced around, trying to make sense of the screaming, the crying, and the water, boiling viciously and fast around us. We made it back to the larger vessel, and I suddenly remembered her face, the way her arm floated loose in the water. I panicked, and in my desperation to get back into the water to save her, in that mad frenzy, Cooper disappeared. And as I calmed down, my breath simmering back to normal, I realized he was gone and looked around for him. I pushed the medics off me, telling them I needed to take a walk. I found him where I saw them only hours before gazing up. "Cooper," I said softly, walking up to him from behind. He was leaning against the railing, contemplating the stars above us, the wind slightly ruffling his still wet hair. "Cooper, I'm sorry." He looked down and met my gaze for the first time since we lost her. His eyes were hard, but behind them, there was something else. Sorrow. and when he spoke, his voice shook once, before he regained composure. "You think that's the first person I've seen die? The first person I haven't been able to save?" I said nothing, staring at him with wide eyes. He brushed past me, knocking my shoulder with his as he did. "Don't be ridiculous. I have work to do." "Cooper, He turned, staring at me, but I avoided his gaze. Suddenly, my throat felt hot and my eyes burned. I blinked rapidly and said in a low voice, I've never seen anyone, drown like that. And she was right there." My voice trembled and I stopped. "Hey," Cooper said suddenly, reaching out and grasping my shoulder firmly, a softness rising in his voice. "I'm sorry. I should have realized. Are you okay?" I took a deep breath and swallowed. "I don't know. How do you just forget about something like that?" He sighed, long, low. "You don't." He lowered his arm and we stood in silence, listening to the waves lap up against the sides of the boat, the breeze cold on my hair, my skin. I shivered. Above us, the stars twinkled mischievously, like they had secrets they were bursting to tell. Around us, the sounds of men yelling and equipment beeping and clanging rang through the air. They were loading up the payload. "Plan C," I breathed. Cooper sighed again, shaking his head. "Usually I would be on board with fire and gunpowder, but this is not a final solution, only a fearful one." He looked exhausted, defeated, and without thinking I heard my own voice sound out. "Let me help you." He glanced at me, silent for a moment, thinking. "No. Let me help," I repeated with more conviction. "I can't risk it." "Why won't you let people help you?" I met his gaze. His expression was totally unreadable. "If I need help, I'll contact you." "How will I know it's you?" "You'll know." He turned and walked away. Today I don't really know what to write, what to do, and it'll be a while until I'll be able to see the coastline of California bobbing over and beneath the horizon. So I wandered around the ship aimlessly, ignoring everyone around me, and found myself in the bridge. Dr. Pike's coat was still draped over the chair where she had left it the night before. At first I hesitated, not wanting to touch it, but I couldn't just leave it there, unclaimed, unnoticed. I figured Cooper would have taken it by now, all her belongings. But then I realized how foolish it was to think that. I hadn't seen him since he walked away the night before. I picked it up gently, placing it over my arm, and as I did, a single scrap of paper fluttered down, catching my eye. I looked at it, not wanting to see her handwriting or read anything she wrote before. But I picked it up anyway, turning it over in my hands, and saw she had written something on it, something that struck me as strange. And I wondered if it was the message she was going to tell us yesterday. It was only 4 words. "The abyss looks back."